Wow, I don't think I've ever had the roof raised for me before, so that's quite special. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and I know everybody says that, but I did buy a new dress and I did iron it, so that is evidence for me being so thrilled. Now, I'm talking about the psychology of belonging, but there's a slight change to the program. I've called it the not quite psychology of belonging. And that is because we've got belonging as a construct. It's a fundamental human need, and it's about feeling socially valued and socially accepted. But it's one of these constructs that's not just studied in psychology, it's studied in mathematics, anthropology, sociology, economics, all sorts of disciplines. Biology is another one. And we know that such a construct that draws so much attention from so many disciplines is important because there is great value and diverse perspectives. Now, there's three main points that I would like to make about belonging as a belonging researcher. First, it's universal, and that means that everybody has a need to belong. But we also know that need can vary from person to person. The second point I'd like to make is that when we do studies that have a look at all the research and all the different theoretical perspectives around belonging, we know that there are four main domains that can help or hinder your sense of belonging. And they're things like competences we have, and we've just heard about that just then. That is the ability to connect, the ability to socially interact, and collaborate with others, the opportunities we have to belong, those opportunities we have for social connections, and then we also have the motivation and inner drive that we have to belong, and then those perceptions around belonging that really drive how we feel, how we fit into particular situations or groups, and how we feel about being in those situations. And of course, that can greatly influence our behaviour, our feelings, and can drive some of the decisions that we make around belonging. Of course, those domains do fit into the context. You can't deny the context matters when it comes to belonging, and those systemic factors can be deeply influential in how we feel. But of course, all of this means that belonging, our sense of belonging, our sense of fit, how comfortable we are, is just so unique and different for everybody. So you might have two people in the same context, but their sense of belonging would be different. So this second point I'd like to make about belonging, it's not just a nice to have, it's a need to have. And we see several theorists talk about it right up there alongside physiological needs, like a need for water or a need for food. And we know that when people are unable to fulfill their sense of belonging, that they will look for belonging in whatever way they can. And sometimes this might not necessarily be the most desirable form of belonging. And when we look at the rise of groups like conspiracy theory groups that emerged during COVID lockdowns, we see a rise in them, and one of the reasons for that has been attributed to the fact that the way that we socialise was obstructed for many people, and people looked for alternative ways to fulfil that need to belong. There's a quote by William Glasser that says, "Hungry students will search for food and lonely students will search for friends." And I think that emphasises just how compulsive we are in terms of motivation to belong. The third point about belonging I'd like to make is it's not just a psychological luxury, it's a biological necessity. And we see evidence of this from anthropology and cave art depicting social relationships, showing how fundamental that was for things like survival, reproduction, safety, and just success as humans. And then if we look at our primate cousins through primatology, we also see that social belonging in groups, cooperation and working together. Now, I don't think any of this is new, But I do think it all serves as an important reminder of just how embedded belonging is, and that the need to be socially connected is within our DNA. And in the spirit of the theme of happiness and its causes, we know that belonging is very important for our mental health and well-being. And there's a lot of evidence for that. And today I'm just going to give you just a taste test, just a sample. But from some research we conducted with our colleagues at Deakin and the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, we found that a lack of belonging at the age of 15 led to increased levels of stress, depression and anxiety at 3 different time points in adulthood, right up until the age of 30. We found that feeling socially valued was an important determinant in what that school belonging looked like. And then, with the same sample, we also looked at tobacco and cannabis use and found again that having a sense of belonging at the age of 15 predicted odds of cannabis and tobacco use right up until the age of 30. So there's a building of compelling evidence that belonging is important. One of the most interesting studies is by Elizabeth Parr and her colleagues, who has shown that in adolescence, belonging is the largest known correlate for depression. And then we've got research by people like Professor Phil Parker over at ACU, where we also looked at belonging at the age of 15 and found that it predicted whether somebody engaged in further education and employment. So we're building a pretty strong business case for why belonging is important. And a bit of a gap, I believe. Is that my time up? Well, one of the things I ask myself is why? Why is there such a profound connection between belonging and mental health, belonging and happiness, belonging and well-being? I wrote a children's book, and I'm not talking about my book. I just happened to have written a children's book in 2014, and it's only just been published. But it was about a cactus dealing with loneliness in the desert. He meets a variety of characters along the way, and they each instill different coping strategies. So they teach him how to reframe his thinking or participate in activities he enjoys. He talks through his feelings, and he engages in these coping strategies, and some don't necessarily work out the way he imagined, and he becomes quite frustrated, but still he persists, and in the end he finds something that is unique to him and that works. But it has only been since writing this book that I realised that this book is not just about teaching these coping mechanisms to kids, which was my original intention of writing this book. I wanted to teach kids coping strategies. It's actually around those social mechanisms that exist within those coping mechanisms. Coping has a strong social element that determines how resilient we will be, how well we will cope with things. So we rely on the others around us to validate the way that we cope, to model their coping strategies and apply them, to fact check some of the problems that we might be having, to use them as social support. So why not all coping strategies involve other people? A lot of them do. When you really think about how we cope and how we become resilient, there is a social element in there. And so I think about sometimes when we talk about, or we hear from people who aren't coping, you hear things like they feel worthless, but it's to other people. They feel worthless to others. They don't feel cared about, but that's by other people. So this journey of writing the book has made me think that maybe we need to be more visible in the way we cope when things do go wrong. We hear about adversity and we hear about when we're not coping, but maybe we need to talk more openly about successful coping. And I'm not talking about big events either. I mean just in day to day, because we're constantly coping and regulating our emotions. So, two thoughts: coping mechanisms are mostly social, and maybe we need to share our coping experiences. But what happens when we don't have those social resources to lean on for our coping? Well, we know through research, say through the social pain overlap theory, that it can bloody hurt. And research in this area has shown that the same receptors in our brain that light up when we feel physical pain are activated in the same way when we feel social and emotional pain as well. Things like ostracism, rejection, social isolation can have that experience of feeling just as painful as childbirth. We don't belong, or when, sorry, I got distracted. Talking about belonging and it being not belonging being painful, it can also hurt our self-esteem. And in fact, research shows that self-esteem can be a bit like a sociometer. And by that I mean like an internal gauge for when we don't belong. That could be something to take away and think about. Like when you feel that there's a little bit of a hit to your self-esteem, what's behind that? Is it related to others? Is it related to a social connection? Is it related to belonging? But research shows that it can be a little bit like a canary in the coal mine in terms of an alarm system going off and telling us when we're not belonging and maybe need to take some action around that. And we know that in terms of pain and not belonging, we know it's so effective. Like we know this because we've used it as a form of punishment in all imaginable scenarios and contexts through the history of our time, including schools. And we continue to grapple with who belongs, in what place, at what time, in Australia, all around the world today. And in the grand scheme of things, you know, we are all just on this planet in the middle of a giant, expanding universe, and yet we're having these conversations about who belongs where and when. But it's not just psychological benefits. Moving on to physical health benefits, there's also some really compelling research around belonging and benefits for health. There's a very famous study by Julia Holt-Lunstad, and she found that social isolation was a health risk factor on par with smoking. So if we stop for a minute and think about that, what would it look like if we took the same approach to tobacco awareness, the health risks associated with tobacco, if we took the same approach as a society to address social isolation? So with tobacco, we've had health campaigns, we've had awareness in all different levels of society. What if we applied that to social isolation? Well, I've been wondering, and so I asked ChatGPT to generate some images for me. So look, I don't know where the intelligent comes into artificial intelligence, but I think we need to work on the bit of text. I couldn't get ChatGPT to cooperate with writing, but that should say 9 out of 10 doctors agree social connection improves health. There are 11 doctors there, so major fail. That's the 1950s. I asked it to go into the 60s. What would an ad look like for social connection? And this is what it generated. I particularly like the one from the 80s. Tune into connection. Social bonds amplify well-being. So that's good. Then this is the 90s. Isolation harms. I don't really remember the 90s and smoking campaigns. I was at the peak of my undergraduate degree and smoking. So I ignored all of that. Then I asked it to get morbid because, as you know, smoking campaigns or anti-smoking campaigns have become pretty morbid through time. So I've asked it to get a little bit graphic. So this is where it's linking it to heart disease, which is very well-known evidence around that, and stroke. And I asked it to get super graphic, like the ones that we see today, like the ones that we see, hiding behind cabinets. And this is as morbid as it got, unfortunately, but linked to early death. So that's just a taste of what it could potentially look like. So a bit of it is about spreading awareness. So some points to end on. Belonging is important across every single age and stage from birth. And we need reminders that belonging is important, but we also then need the finders. We need to be able to prioritise and keep finding time and opportunities to build those social connections. And then we need the binders, and that is the things that help us commit to engaging in those opportunities to feel a sense of belonging. And anybody seeking to build a sense of belonging in their workplace, in their school, in whatever context they're in their personal lives, there's plenty of examples of cost-free opportunities around us. Even talking to Jocelyn Brewer, who will be emceeing tomorrow over lunch, she was talking about the friend raises through her PNF, which I thought was a really novel way of looking at building those connections. The other thing that we could do is just ask. So Jan Hare, a Canadian Indigenous scholar, recently said we need to stop viewing people as stakeholders and start viewing them as right holders. So thinking about everybody having a fundamental right to feel a sense of belonging, but also everybody having a responsibility to build a sense of belonging for others. This means that we must listen and give voice to the people who are within the particular context that we're interested in building belonging in. And even some of our youngest people in society, as you can see here, have a good sense that being included, feeling safe, helps their sense of belonging. And I would like to leave you all with this gorgeous quote that I got from a 5-year-old in one of our studies. She said, "Belonging makes me feel like someone loves me and like there's a little heart inside a big heart." And I know, it's gorgeous. And the quote highlights the importance of belonging as a social responsibility and to ensure that we're helping others feel seen and valued and supported, helping others feel like they are cared for. And all it takes are very small actions. So can I just leave you all with a very small challenge today to perhaps just reach out and be a big heart to somebody within your life. It might be somebody you haven't connected to for a while. It might be a meaningful connection at the conference. But thank you for listening.
Thank you.